right, let's see how our audio is doing now. You're going to hear a little bit of feedback here in a second because I'm just testing to make sure it works before we get back into talking here.
All right, let's see how our audio.
There we go.
You're going to hear a little bit of.
All right, so I think we're good now. Why don't we just start over? Welcome to Sharing Our Pairings. This is a special episode. We're drinking Prairie Bomb. I'm your host, Tripp. This is my co-host, Jason. And we're both looking forward to testing this whole situation here out. So this is, I'll hold it up again for those of you who might have missed it the first time or couldn't hear me. This is Artisan Ales, or Prairie Artisan Ales Bomb. Bomb is their Imperial Stout, and it is aged with coffee, cocoa nibs, vanilla beans, and chili peppers. And what we have here is a can of Prairie Bomb with only one of those ingredients each. So we've got the chocolate, coffee, vanilla, and chili pepper. So we're going to see how it pairs with the Tatuaje K222, which is Pete Johnson's. It's the first cigar he's blended. I'm not sure when the last one was, but it's been a few years. I think the last one was the Kahonu 2012. Was the last regular production cigar he made in the my father Miami factory. So it's a little pricey. I think it's about like $14.50. But it's kind of got that same feel as a Kahonu or a J21 or something like that, but in a slightly beefier size. I should have looked up the specs before. Do you know? I think it's a 6.5 or 6 3/4 or so by 52.
Something like that.
I'll get the details.
It's definitely
in a second.
more than 50, but it's not a 54. But they're good. And I think, if I remember correctly, this is technically a mix of the J21 and the Kanohu blend. It's sort of, they took elements of each of those two cigars and made this out of it.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. I'm getting the size information here. 5 7/8 by 52 is the size, and the retail price is the recommended retail price is $14.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're gonna see how this pairs with 5 different versions of Prairie Bomb. Any notes before we get started tasting here?
I don't think so. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be interesting because I think this is definitely a spicy cigar.
Yeah.
So I have no worries that it won't stand up to this. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. So we're gonna start with the chili pepper here. I think purely because based on the amount of chili pepper flavor that's in the regular version, I don't think this is gonna be overpowering or spicy. But we'll find out in a moment. It's got a little more heat than I expected. It's not intense, but you feel it.
Oh yeah, you definitely feel that kind of on the sides of your tongue.
Yeah.
And in the back of your mouth.
It's weird because you can tell it's Prairie Bomb, but you can also tell it's missing something.
Yeah, it's totally different than the normal Prairie Bomb. What's interesting is that on when you're normally drinking Prairie Bomb, there's so much going on. It's hard to get a good idea for what the base stout is that they're using before they add all this stuff to it. And here, I think you taste that, and then you just have the spice.
Yeah.
Peppers.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a very mild spice. Like the spiciness of the cigar is blowing the spiciness of the beer out of the water.
Yeah.
I think the intensity of the stout kind of, I don't know, it feels like it prepares your palate a little bit. So it's not like the spice of the beer is completely covered up by the cigar. But you take a draw on the cigar, and this beer is not taking anything away from the cigar.
It's actually a good combination.
I like
that.
Yeah, we had intended to do the broadleaf version of this cigar because, of course, that's kind of got a little bit more of that sweetness from the broadleaf wrapper, but it's the same blend underneath, so it's still got that intense spice. But we can only get our hands on the regular version, which is just fine with me. It's a very good cigar.
And sometimes when you're doing a broadleaf with a stout, it can work, but then also sometimes you get sweet on sweet, and it's a little bit too much.
Yeah, this is even without the chocolate or the vanilla, this stout is very sweet. But I like that in a high gravity imperial stout. It's we were talking about it a lot last night when we were talking about stouts. It's got to have that viscosity, and this stout they nail the texture of the stout.
There's nothing worse than a thin stout.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when they call it an imperial stout.
That's good, and it kind of I was trying to see how it changes the flavor profile of the cigar a little bit, and I don't feel like it has a major effect on it. Maybe it brings out some of the earthy characteristics a little more.
Yeah, I think to me it's I know that it's coming from the beer, but when I smoke the cigar, when the smoke is on my palate, I can really taste the the vegetal flavor of the chili peppers.
Yeah.
More than the spice. Like that kind of I think these are pasilla peppers, I've read, I believe. They might be Anaheims, but it reminds me of those kinds of peppers where you've got that like chlorophyll kind of like bell pepper kind of grassiness almost. And you can really taste that once you've taken a draw off the cigar. What's up, Chico? Giving us a shout out. Shout out to Chico. Loyal viewer. Yeah, this is interesting. At first I thought we were going to be blowing through these pairings, but it's so complex that I just kind of want to keep sipping on it and see where it takes me.
I feel like it's the kind of thing where it's like you get this general flavor thing where you know something's happening, but it's really hard to put into words. Some things are easier to describe than others, and this is not.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, and the as you drink it, the heat picks up a little bit. Like it's not intense, but I mean, if you're watching, you could see I took a sip like maybe 50 seconds ago or so, maybe almost a minute, and I still feel that heat on my palate, and like you feel that like feeling of the heat in your stomach.
Mm-hmm. It lingers like a hot sauce, kind of. But
yeah,
it's not,
exactly.
It's definitely not. If you've ever had like a habanero IPA or something, it's nothing like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I think of the right way to do a chili beer, I think of something like this, where you get a little bit of that chili flavor and just a small amount of that heat. Something like habanero sculpin, where it's like face melt hot, I think is too intense and it covers up the flavors of the beer. All right, I'm gonna move on to what do we have next? Is this the vanilla? Yeah, this is the vanilla only. Which is, I think this one's going to be interesting because I don't get a ton of vanilla off the regular bomb. Like, it's there, but I feel like it mixes so much that you don't, it doesn't stick out as much.
Definitely notice it in there.
Oh, wow.
That is vanilla. That is
yeah, that's very vanilla-y.
That's almost like if you just made a vanilla milkshake. It really is that kind of in your face vanilla.
I was just thinking this would go this would make a really good like beer float.
It's sweet too. Wow.
Yeah, there's definitely a little more sweetness and like absolutely some creaminess compared to the chili version. This is really interesting. I wasn't sure exactly how these were going to work out. I was worried the chili one would be completely overpowering. And this one, I don't know like if I have to take a couple more sips to make up my mind. But I'm not sure that this is like the chili one I would buy. I would buy a can of that and drink it. I'm not sure I would be able to drink a pint of this one.
This is a bit much. It kind of reminds me of there's a local place that does a salted caramel stout, and it's fun to drink a little bit of it, but to drink a whole pint gets to be a bit much after a while.
Yeah, I think this is kind of in the same realm where it's just a little too much of that vanilla flavor. It's really bombarding with vanilla flavor.
The spice of the cigar helps, though.
I don't think I'd smoked much of the cigar since switching. Yeah, I really only get the spice from the cigar, though. I feel like it covers up a lot of the flavor.
Yeah, it does. It really, like, because you have such a sweet hit in your mouth, it's like you can't detect any nuance.
Yeah, all the nuance leaves the cigar completely. I need some water to refresh my palate a little bit here. Yeah, that's just too much vanilla for me. I'm gonna go back to the chili for a minute because I like that one.
Yeah, and it's amazing how just taking a sip of water and then taking a puff of the cigar, it's like all that complexity is right back.
Yeah. And we should note the K222. The reason it's named that is because Pete Johnson made it as a tribute to his dog Kona, who passed away at 2:22 p.m. or something like that. Which I could see if you had like a digital clock, when like at the moment it would you would remember that number for sure. And so he wanted to make it as kind of a tribute, and of course to return to make something new regular production at the Miami factory, which is kind of, I mean, is totally where he started. And I think it's safe to say he's partially responsible for the success of that factory, which eventually turned into My Father's Cigars. Man, that vanilla is just so overpoweringly vanilla.
It is strong. I was really surprised how strong it was.
Yeah, I'm curious how the coffee is going to be. So this one is the coffee stout, and before we drink this one, we're going to take a quick break for one of our sponsors. We will be right back.
Brought to you by Gurkha Cigars. Gurkha Cigars, makers of the world's finest cigars. Try the 93 rated Heritage featuring a Rosado Ecuadorian Habano wrapper, Nicaraguan binder, and Dominican, Pennsylvanian, and Nicaraguan fillers. Blended by Gurkha's blending team at American Caribbean Cigars, it is hand-rolled Nicaraguan, available in 35-count boxes. Talk to your local B&M about the Heritage today, or talk to them about other fine Gurkha cigars. Whatever your taste preferences, Gurkha has a cigar that's right for you.
And we're back, smoking the Tatuaje K222. Again, I'm not sure whether it's supposed to be called the 222 or the 222. But either way, I love this cigar. And we just took a sip of the coffee version of Prairie Bomb. And the coffee is much more palatable than the vanilla. The vanilla is just so sweet and so packed with vanilla flavor that it's overpowering. And this one is certainly not as overpowering. And tastes kind of more like a traditional Imperial coffee stout. And it's got like I'm trying to identify what it is. It reminds me of like sarsaparilla or star anise or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
it's got like a licorice kind of finish.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure whether that's coming from the cigar or from the cigar or from the beer or from the coffee. Because I don't recall tasting in any of the previous ones. Let me go back to the chili. I'm not touching that vanilla for now. Yeah, that one, it's there a little bit. So I think that's actually kind of from the stout. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. But I'm checking to see if it shows the IBUs on here. Because this is a for a stout, it's very bitter. It's kind of in the style of like a Russian Imperial, like Old Rasputin, where it's like, I would guess like 70 IBUs or so. It's pretty bitter.
Yeah. Whereas a lot of stouts are definitely less than 50, around like 30 or so.
What do you think of the coffee version?
I like it. I think that of all of them so far, they could just sell that as a beer.
Yeah, I think so too. And it would also be a lot cheaper than Prairie Bomb.
Yeah. And it's good. It goes with the cigar well too. I feel like the kind of the bitterness of the coffee plays well with just kind of the spice and the earthy qualities of the cigar.
Yeah, and the cigar's got like that. One of the things I always equate with Tatuaje, especially the Miami-made brown labels, is like that meaty, like salted steak kind of quality. It's kind of got that mix of sweet and salty, with a little bit of umami. It's like it reminds me of a juicy steak. And it actually brings that out from all that bitterness, I think.
Yeah, it's good, and I think the aftertaste of all of that is nice.
Yeah.
Just kind of let the cigar and the aftertaste of the stout linger in your mouth a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
This is a good cigar too. I kind of forgot how good these are.
Yeah, me too. I don't. They're kind of hard to find. I'm not sure what the word Tatuaje uses for them, but they are a limited regular production. My understanding is kind of that when they're on a the production schedule is irregular, where whenever they have rollers that aren't making anything, they kind of schedule them to make some of these. So they've always got boxes coming out, but they just kind of come out sporadically, and they just show up at your retailer. And I'm guessing this is one of those cigars that's kind of constantly back ordered, and they just ship them whenever they have a couple hundred boxes. I know our local shop just got a box in recently. Robert Downey wants to know if this is an Undercrown ashtray. Yes, sir, it is. I was going to mention that during our last station break, which is an ad for Drew Estate. But Drew Estate sent many of their media partners. If you look on Facebook, a lot of the magazines, a lot of the bloggers got these awesome mega standing ashtrays, kind of as a Christmas gift from Drew Estate, which I was very surprised to receive it, to say the least. I wasn't expecting anything like that. It was one of those things, like, it was a bucket list ashtray for me, where I had seen them. I've used them in Nicaragua. I have one of these kind of ashtrays with the pewter insert. But I thought that if I was ever to get a mega standing ashtray, it was because that I would just be super lucky to win one on Drew Diplomat. And then it just showed up at my house in late December, which is amazing. And thank you. If anybody from Drew Estate is watching, thank you. It's gorgeous. I love it.
Shout out to Subculture Studios.
Yeah, seriously, it's amazing.
We can't really show you because of the way we're set up, the lower half of this thing, but it really is awesome.
Yeah, and it's all hand carved, which is unbelievable. They have a team of people in Nicaragua that carve these, and then they bring them to Subculture Studios to paint them. And of course, the pewter ashtray here is also hand cast in Nicaragua, which is really cool. You know, Nicaragua is kind of special to me, and you know, it means a lot. Like, every time I see it, it reminds me of those nights on safari, staying up late in the living room there. It's awesome. All right, I got to try this coffee again. Yeah, I mean, that's just a good, solid, like, coffee stout.
I like that a lot.
And it's a strong coffee stout.
Yeah.
There aren't many coffee stouts that end up at 13%.
Oh yeah, all of these are 13%.
Yeah.
That's
It's only
That's a lot.
152 ounces of 13% beer. As we were talking about earlier, we're probably not going to finish these. I've decided that whatever we have left, we're just going to commingle together in growlers and split up. Which I think will be kind of interesting. Like, if we end up with a ultra vanilla flavored version of Bomb, but it's still got all of the different elements, it would be kind of interesting.
If we finish this, I'd be sleeping right here in this chair.
Oh, I would be sleeping right here. I wouldn't even be able to get upstairs. I'm trying to decide if we should get into the chocolate yet or not. Maybe we should, yeah, let's get into the chocolate. I think simply by the virtue of this being 5 different versions of the same beer, it kind of ends up being a short pour style where we're going to talk about some other stuff and, kill some time. You can't talk about each one of these pairings for 15 minutes.
No.
Simply because, kind of the reason we're holding the Prairie Bomb bottles for last is because we've had Prairie Bomb before. So all of these kind of taste like Prairie Bomb that's missing something. So I'm going to take a couple sips of the chocolate and see what Jason thinks.
That's good too. I would say that the chocolate is nice. It's almost it's not like a candy chocolate. It's more of like a cacao.
Yeah.
Baking chocolate kind of a quality into it.
Well, that's I believe, yeah. So it uses cacao nibs rather than like baking chocolate or something like that. So you really just get kind of that earthy, chocolatey flavor without any sweetness.
What's interesting about that too is that I noticed that that for whatever reason seems to cancel out some of the spice on the cigar, but it brings out a lot more depth in the cigar too.
Yeah, I get a lot more sweetness from the cigar. I'm trying to place what it is. It reminds me of, like, we were talking last night about on sharing our pairings. Last night's episode when we were smoking the ADN from La Aurora. We were talking about how when you describe flavor notes, you're not necessarily describing exactly what you taste. You're describing what it reminds you of. And this reminds me of like a sweet donut kind of glaze. At least paired with this chocolate.
Yeah, it usually relates back to a food memory.
And Chico says he's liking more and more of the stouts. Before I comment on that, I have to say I really like having kind of a giant version of us here. We're doing a slightly different recording setup. We're obviously not using Skype because we're together. But I can actually like read your comments on the video rather than having to scroll through Facebook to read them, which is really nice. Chico says that he's liking the stouts more and more. If you like stouts, this is like it's a bucket list stout in the way that if you like stouts and you've never had this beer, you've done something wrong with your life. If you can get your hands on it, because it is hard to find in some areas. We didn't get any of it until maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago or so. You couldn't get it in Oregon at all. The only time I had it at that point was when we were I was in Austin for a business conference, and they had it at a bar, and I was like, I gotta have a pint of that. And it staggered me how good it is. It's this stout that's super intense from the stout part, but then it's also got all these additions that make it super complex. And Robert Downey says he likes it this way. I like it this way too. Unfortunately, it's not viable to do it this way every time because we have guests so often, and because Dennis, my regular co-host for Sharing Our Pairings, is on the other side of the country. But I think we might try to do this a little more often than once ever. So I think you can look forward to more live, well, sort of live versions of the show.
It definitely feels nice. It feels loosely professional almost.
I don't know about that. But yeah, sort of.
This isn't ESPN radio or anything, but
Yeah, like, I feel like every version of this except for the vanilla version could be a stout on its own.
mhm.
That wouldn't have to have the name Deconstructed Bomb. I mean, that's how these particular ones are marketed, because they're the same base stout, just with one of the ingredients. I kind of wish that they had just the stout. That would be great. And Robert Downey says he's sending a few gallons of paint. I've got paint, dog. At this point, I'm not painting it only because it's funny to see the comments. Like, I've got a couple gallons of just white paint. I have to just sand this stuff down a little bit and slap some paint up there. I promise I'll get it done someday. The problem is I'm too busy smoking cigars and making shows.
It's a garage thing.
Yeah, that too. It's just a garage. I don't care about it that much. I would like to get like a backdrop. I think that would be better if I got some kind of cool backdrop to go behind me and just kind of pin up on the wall. So maybe I'll look into something like that. We'll see. All right, Robert, if you're coming to paint it for me, done. You can do that. I'll even pay you in cigars.
And smoking paint all day.
Anthony Rasicki says graffiti project. Absolutely. I actually talked to a buddy who does airbrushing as a semi-professional hobby. But he thought about making a backdrop, but I haven't talked to him about it in a while. But like something graffiti style, that would be like no brainer. I would do that in a second.
We gotta offer Jesse Flores a all expenses paid vacation.
Yeah, exactly. Once we've got that in the SigFed budget, I'll offer that to him, and we'll see how that goes. Man, this chocolate, I can't stop drinking it.
The chocolate's good. I think the chocolate and the coffee are definitely my favorites so far.
Yeah. Before we open these bottles, I want to go back through and taste them a little bit more.
I'm almost curious what I'm gonna try taking a sip of the vanilla and then a sip of some of the other ones and see what it does.
Yeah, the chili pepper just kind of it's a beer that I could see myself drinking, like having an entire pint of maybe when I'm at a bar or something. But it is missing something. And not just because I've had the full version of Prairie Bomb.
Now it's interesting because if you take a sip of the vanilla and then take a sip of the chili pepper and kind of mix it in your mouth, the chili pepper definitely subdues the heavy sweetness of the vanilla, but the vanilla is still super sweet.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That spice, like, I feel like it actually brings out more spice. I'm tasting more spice on the palate than I was just drinking the chili. But it's still like the vanilla is overpoweringly sweet for me. Anthony Rasicki, yes. Anthony Rasicki says dissected Prairie Bomb. They call it deconstructed. But it's weird because I haven't seen it anywhere else. So I'm not sure how widely available it is. I know Prairie has recently been in the news. They were recently on 10MU, the beer site that Half Wheel runs, or rather the guys that created Half Wheel run a beer blog called 10MU. And apparently this past weekend, Prairie released 60 single keg version or single barrel beers. So basically they made a single, I think it was like a 55-gallon run of each, but there were 60 different beers that they only made one 55-gallon run of that you could buy. But that's besides the point. They call it Deconstructed Bomb. So each of these is a variant of Deconstructed Bomb. And I've only seen one place locally that got it. It's the only place I've seen that has it. As far as I'm assuming they're only available on tap. So it's really only places that get Prairie Bomb on tap. And I mean, it's kind of asking a lot of anybody who puts beers on tap, because you have to put 4 on tap at the same time from the same company. Which, I mean, the place where I got this, I think they only have like 12 taps, and it's just a liquor store that has a growler station. Shout out to Cedar Mill Liquor. But yeah, the deconstructed version of Bomb, it's interesting. I tried to get a couple bottles of Pirate Bomb, but that's one of those beers that's still almost mythical status around here. Like, you're lucky if you can get it. Christmas Bomb is easy to come by, but that's because, in my opinion, it's not very good. It's just kind of overpoweringly cinnamon flavored. It tastes like Red Hots. Let's see.
It's interesting because it seems like the chocolate actually has the most effect on canceling out the super sweetness of the.
Yeah.
That vanilla is strong. Like if I were going to mix these, I would do just a splash of vanilla.
Well, we will get to that, I assure you. We're going to take another quick break for one of our sponsors. We'll be right back with more Deconstructed Prairie Bomb.
Sponsored by Cigar Oasis. Don't spend all your time worrying about your cigar wrappers cracking, splitting, or falling apart from humidity fluctuation issues. Set it and forget it by choosing Cigar Oasis, a professional solution which provides equal distribution of humidity with precise electronic controls. Monitor your cigars through the internet using the Smart Humidor Wi-Fi attachment. Why don't you spend all your time enjoying your cigars and relaxing, and let Cigar Oasis protect your cigars? Cigar Oasis has solutions for any humidor. Make sure you set it and forget it today.
And we're back. My cigar went out right before the break because I talked a little bit too much. And I'll blame that on Jason because he doesn't talk that much.
It's good. I will say that this is a good cigar. It's it was. I was actually a little surprised how expensive it was when I went to buy it, but absolutely no regrets.
Sorry if it looks like I'm moving around. It's because even though I've got like the giant display, or not even giant, but I've got it much larger than normal, our camera's right in the way. So I'm trying to read Anthony Rosiki's comment. So he says that a bar in Pittsburgh called the House of 1,000 Beers, which sounds like my kind of place, hosted an event. And he said that he had to go to MIA Beer in Doral, Florida to try Prairie Bomb and Pirate Bomb at all. Yeah, I mean, it's weird because it's not a super limited production, but it's a kind of limited allocation. So, like, for me, if I go into a store and they have Prairie Bomb, I'm picking up a minimum of 2 bottles because it's not something that I can just go out to the store and buy every day. It's not quite readily available, but I've never had too much of a hard time finding it when I wanted it.
It's just popular enough, I think, to where.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the fact that they use a larger brewery to make this. So if you're not familiar with Prairie, they actually got acquired by Krebs mid last year, I believe. But they've always contract brewed most of their beer with Krebs, who's another. I'm going to try to figure out where they're from here. In Oklahoma, Krebs, Oklahoma. So they've always had most of their beer brewed by Krebs, if not all of it. I'm trying to remember the whole story. But recently they actually got acquired by Krebs Brewing. As Krebs grew, and most of the people at Prairie are staying on. They're still, obviously, with that project where they made 60 unique beers, there are only 1 barrel available of each. They're still making weird beers. Krebs isn't like a macro brewer or anything.
No.
I think they make some local sort of macro brew style beers, um, but they're still keeping the Prairie project kind of on its own, making weird versions of Prairie and Prairie Bomb and stuff like that.
And my understanding of beer distribution is that you almost need a partner like that
Mm-hmm.
to really get your beer out nationally. Because like we have tons of breweries in the Portland and just Oregon in general that don't distribute outside of the state because it's such a pain.
Yeah, so I actually that's a good talking point. I watched a documentary a couple years ago called Beer Wars that was super informative, and one of the things they talked a lot about is the three-tiered system, which the three-tiered system is uh, brewer, distributor, retailer. And so brewers can, in most states, this doesn't apply to all states. There are certain states that have different laws, and there are certain states that have like kind of you're able to buy directly from the brewery, but you're not able to buy directly from a distributor kind of thing. So in most states, they have a three-tiered system, which means breweries are only allowed to sell their beer to distributors, and distributors are only allowed to sell their beer to retailers, and then of course retailers are only allowed to sell their beers to consumers. And what that means is you can't go to a brewery and buy beer. If you're buying beer from a brewery, it's because they have a distributor that they sell the beer to and then sells back to the tap room that's on site. Um, in Oregon, that's a little different. You can kind of make beer and sell it on premises, which we're very lucky about. And you can also self-distribute, which is illegal in a lot of states, but not all states. I know of at least a couple breweries in like Michigan, not Michigan, a couple breweries in New Jersey, and I think a couple in Indiana that can self-distribute. There are definitely ones here. We were talking earlier tonight before the show about Sticky Hands. It's made by a company called Block 15 Brewing, and they self-distribute only within the Portland area. They basically have a van that delivers all their beer. But again, that's not available everywhere. And because of that, a lot of those distributors are owned by companies like Budweiser and Miller, and they prioritize the beer the way they want to. And unless you're a partner with them, they are not going to push your product as much as they could. And part of that system, I believe, is that in some states, grocery stores and stores that sell beer basically they don't order product. They have somebody come in and place the product on the shelf, which is the distributor, and then they pay for whatever product gets placed. And the downside of that is if that distributor is owned by Budweiser, there's a Budweiser employee coming into the store putting beer on the shelf. And what do you think he's going to put on the shelf? The beer that his boss tells him to put in, which is Budweiser. And that's why a lot of states like macro brews are everywhere. But I mean, we're just lucky that we're in Oregon because Oregon has it's part of kind of the West Coast microbrew revolution that happened in the 80s and 90s, where most of the beer, I think it's something like 54% of the beer consumed in Oregon is made in Oregon, which is insane. I mean, that doesn't happen in most places. Like, you can go to the store and get Budweiser and stuff like that, but it's not half of the aisle like it is in most states.
And I think I read a really interesting kind of article about this, but in the late 80s, early 90s, Windmere Brewing, which is kind of like an old school craft brewery from the Portland area, and they're pretty big now with the Windmere Hefeweizen. They worked with some other major craft breweries like Deschutes and like Full Sail to actually get laws changed in the Oregon legislature to make direct distribution possible and things like that.
Yeah, and it's kind of it was an uphill battle all the way along the way, which got us to the place where we're lucky enough to be now. And Jason Davenport says the Thursday night crew at the cigar shop in Montgomery, Alabama. Say hello. What's up, guys? Thank you for watching. This is kind of it's weird. It feels kind of weird. It feels like a more casual episode, even though it may look more professional since we're both on the same screen. We're not having like technical difficulties other than that first 3 minutes. But it feels like a weird version of what we usually do, because we're not talking directly into the camera. We're talking to each other, and it's just kind of different.
We're only dealing with one internet connection and not
Yeah.
2 or 3.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm lucky enough to have a decent internet connection most of the time. All right, I think I'm ready to open this this bomb and see how it stacks up against the others. This is a oh man, I should have done this before the show, but I didn't want to do it. I've got this tricky bottle opener.
Where is the bottle opener?
It's that
I
hook
see.
on the
Okay.
bottom. Oh, that's how it works. Okay.
That was all bad.
All right, so I'm going to take one more sip of each of the deconstructed Prairie bombs, just to kind of get my head around each of them before I dive into the regular version of Prairie Bomb.
Feels like I'm at a beer event.
I know, right? Like I had to go buy plastic cups for this because I didn't want to dirty 10 or 12 cups just for this. Man, that vanilla is just too much for me. It's like, it's not cloyingly sweet, it's cloyingly vanilla flavored.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but that coffee one is so good.
The coffee's nice. It almost has a cold brew quality to it.
Yeah, and the chocolate is getting blasted by our heater here, so it's kind of a little warmer. Which I'm starting to think brings out like that kind of licorice flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And these crowlers, they're 32 ounces each, so I knew they weren't going to warm up quickly. They've been out of the fridge for like, I think about 4 hours at this point. Because this is one of those beers that if you drink it ice cold, you're kind of doing it a disservice.
Yeah.
Cold beer, though we love it in America, and I love cold beer, it softens certain flavors and sharpens other flavors. And for stouts, slightly warmer is typically better. Dennis and I both have talked about this a couple times on sharing our pairings, and both of us are kind of modus operandi when it comes to stouts. Is I usually take it out ice cold, and I take a couple sips, and then I let it sit for like half an hour.
Yeah.
Like for me, a bottle or a can of stout is like an hour and a half long affair, because I want it to warm up a little bit as I'm drinking it so I can taste the evolution of it. But then the regular version of Bomb here, I had in the fridge until a little while ago.
And something I learned from taking a class on some wine is that they talk about room temperature and wine and stuff, but typically when they're talking about room temperature, they're not necessarily talking about room temperature in modern America. They're talking about room temperature in old school Europe.
Yeah.
So it's like 60 to 65 degrees versus 70 degrees.
Chico's hitting the sack. Thank you for watching, Chico. We appreciate it. We'll see you next week. I don't know if it's having the deconstructed versions, but I get a lot more vanilla than I usually do from Prairie Bomb.
I just noticed the same thing. I was like, oh wow, I really noticed that vanilla in there.
I feel like it's my palate tricking me because I've been overpowered by the vanilla so much. And I feel like I get more chili pepper than I usually do. And Robert Downey wants to know if we know the history behind room temperature. I don't. I don't know the history. I'm guessing it has something to do with like cask aged beers, or what do they call it when it's on a tap that's in a cask where you have to pump it?
Oh yeah, just a cask tap instead
Yeah.
of putting it on tap or something. Priests used to visit homes so people would hide the alcohol under their sink or in cabinets. Okay,
Okay, that's actually really interesting.
that makes sense.
Yeah, as I go through it, I think the vanilla is softening a little bit. I'm getting a little more of the chocolate and the coffee. And then there's definitely, I don't know if they've ramped it up this year, because this is a recent production of Prairie Bomb. I actually learned today. I did a little bit of research, so I noticed if you look at the bottle here, I have to hold it super close so it doesn't focus on Jason. It says, oh no, oh well, I give up. So it says Spaceship Earth Coffee Company on the bottom. And if you've ever had a bottle of Prairie Bomb, you know that it's always said, I can't pronounce it, Nordriagos, I believe is how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
That's always been their coffee company. And apparently in late 2016, they changed it. And this is the first bottle I've ever bought that didn't have Nordriagos on it. Which means that previously I was always getting aged Prairie Bomb, because this is minimum or maximum about a year and a few months old.
Yeah, I still have an old bottle of Prairie Bomb that I've had for a while, and it's the other coffee brand. So
yeah, and that's something to say about Prairie Bomb, is that it ages really well.
Mm-hmm. As long as you can stand to forget about it, it will keep.
Yeah, exactly. And Robert Downey's hitting the sack too. Thank you for watching, Robert. We really appreciate it. Good night. Yeah, I'm not sure if, oh man, party fell. I'm not sure if the Prairie Bomb has changed in recent years, or if this is kind of a more fresh bottle that I'm used to. But I'm definitely getting so much more of the vanilla and the chili than I usually get.
Yeah, I agree.
And it could simply be that I've had them alone now and tasted what they taste like.
I noticed that vanilla so much now.
Yeah, me too. Not in a good way.
Like my palate's now been trained.
Yeah. I gotta take some water here. And it is that time for us to take our final station break. Of course, this segment is brought to you by the fine folks over at Drew Estate. They sent me this sweet ashtray. If you download the Drew Diplomat app, you can check in your cigars, kind of like Untapped for beer, which we'll be checking in later, of course. And for every cigar you check in, you get some points, and then you can bid those points on sweet prizes from Subculture, like these kind of ashtrays. And you can have them mail you one of your very own, which I mean, I would freak out if I won one on Drew Diplomat.
Do remember to both check in your cigars and enter a contest from time to time on the app, because I'm terrible about it.
Yeah, I'm really bad about it. I smoke a lot of Drew Estate cigars. I almost never remember to actually check them in. So how do you feel like the Prairie Bomb compares with the cigar, or pairs with the cigar, compared to the
So I
Deconstructed version?
I think the Prairie Bomb, as a full beer, has less. So you get the vanilla, but it's not as negative of an experience as the straight vanilla.
Yeah.
with the cigar. I still get a lot of spice. I still get a lot of earth, and kind of that. It's interesting because as I go a little more, I think as this warms up, I'm noticing a little bit more of that licorice anise quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that as well. As it's warming up, it definitely kind of that overpowering sweetness from the vanilla backs off a little bit.
And I will say that I almost feel like this was a good choice because the broadleaf would have been much sweeter than this.
I feel like it would have been competing with the beer a little bit more. And I'm reaching the final third. You're not quite there yet. The retrohale's really getting that spice back at this point.
These Tatuaje reserves do that. It's kind of like they give you a break in the middle.
Yeah.
From the spice.
And a lot of people probably don't know this. That's actually because of the bunching process that they use, which different companies have different bunching processes. Most of Nicaragua uses the same style of bunching process, which is where they bunch the cigar, which means they kind of have all of the tobaccos that go in the cigar together, ready to roll with the binder. And before they put the binder on, they break the bottom off and fold it back in to the first third, and they break the top off and fold that back into the final third.
Oh, okay.
And so you end up with kind of this extra tobacco in the front, extra tobacco at the end. And that's kind of where the pepper blast that you get in some Nicaraguan cigars comes from, is because you're kind of getting twice as much Ligero. And from what I've heard, at some factories, they actually they pick out everything but the Ligero when they do that. So they're kind of folding back in only Ligero. So you're getting double the Ligero in that portion, but not double the Visos and the Secos and stuff like that.
That's cool. I didn't know that. That actually makes a lot of sense.
That's my guess as to why it's like, it started off really spicy and then it settled down a little bit and now it's picking up again. Yeah, I think usually I say that a broadleaf cigar goes better with stouts. But for a Habano wrapper, I think this actually goes pretty well with it. I'm not sure that the broadleaf would be better.
Sometimes a good spicy Habano really cuts through.
Yeah, the sweetness of something like an Imperial Stout like this. It's got that heavy sweetness, heavy bitterness. And then Habano typically brings kind of more of a meaty quality than a sweet.
Yeah.
Meaty and spicy, which contrasts a little bit with that sweet, chocolatey, dark, bitter flavor.
I think a Pennsylvania broadleaf might be interesting with this too.
Oh yeah, something like a Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah.
Or any of the multitude of Pennsylvania broadleafs that Blackworks makes. Yeah, I can see this going really well with like a Killer Bee or something like that.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna check out these deconstructed versions again and see how they stack up now that I've had the regular version of Prairie Bomb.
I think it's interesting that with the chocolate being the closest to our heater here, and as it warms up more, I feel like this chocolate keeps getting better the warmer it gets.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough about Prairie Bomb, how good it is at room temperature or even warmer than room temperatures. It's got so much complexity that if you're drinking it ice cold, it covers up a lot of that complexity. I think maybe I'm just a chili fanatic, but I think the chili version is actually my favorite. I like that subtle spice with the bitterness and the sweetness of the stout.
The chili version has a fantastic aftertaste.
Yeah, the finish of it is
Like
really
you just
good.
drink it and just let your mouth sit with that for a little bit. It's really nice.
Thank you, Anthony Rosicki. Backfilling. That's what they call when they fold the bunch in.
Okay.
And he says that that causes the transitions, and it really does. That's what causes the transitions in cigars from the first third to the final third, and differences in that process are what can cause like some cigars start off super strong and then they mellow out in the second third and then even more in the final third. And then some cigars start off mellow and they ramp up as you go on, and it's all about that bunching process.
Yeah, and I'm noticing right about, it's hard to see, but right about here, the spice is definitely starting to ramp.
Yeah, that vanilla is just too much for me, man.
Vanilla almost would be a good thing to make a dessert out of. Like put a
Yeah,
scoop
that's
of
what I
ice
was saying
cream in
before.
that,
Like,
or...
put a scoop of ice cream in there. It would make a really good beer float.
Yeah.
It's just not great as a beer on its own, which is surprising because the other three are actually like, they would be marketable as a beer.
Yeah.
People would buy those beers, all three of them. But the vanilla on its own is just so much vanilla that it overpowers everything else in the beer. And then like the chocolate has got that that cocoa bitterness. Or, I'm sorry, I think this is the coffee actually. Yeah, this is the coffee. Has that bitterness that plays really well with the really intense bitterness of the beer itself. But it's kind of a I'm trying to think of how to describe it. Coffee goes really well with hop bitterness because it's a different type of bitterness on your palate. So when you're getting those two different types of bitterness competing with each other, I feel like it works really well.
It does, and it's kind of like, I think that's one of the reasons that when you drink coffee in the morning, a lot of times it's nice to have like something with it. People will have a scone, people will have some kind of a bready type of a thing, and it's a really good contrast of flavors.
Yeah. Man, and then the chocolate warming up is so good. It's so chocolatey, but it's not sweet. It's kind of a dark bitter chocolate that, again, the bitterness of the chocolate is different from the bitterness of the hops. So you're getting kind of a layered bitterness, layers of bitter.
One of the interesting things about trying all these things is now I'm really interested to try if they ever come out with just like the base stout that they use.
Yeah.
To put all this together.
I would be very interested in trying that. I wish that was part of the Deconstructed series. If they had just the stout, I would have gotten that as well, and then we would have had way too much beer. I think one of the amazing things about Prairie Bomb is that they make all four of these beers go together well. As it's warming up a little bit, as I'm drinking it and acclimating to it a little bit, I'm getting less of that vanilla hit.
Yeah.
And of course the coffee and the chocolate go really well together, and then it's just an interesting juxtaposition of flavors. There's the bitterness of the coffee mixed with the bitterness of the chocolate, and of course the bitterness of the hops. Then with the sweetness of the vanilla, and which goes really well with the sweetness of the beer itself. In the regular bomb version, not so much in the vanilla only version. And then with the you get that spicy finish.
Mm-hmm.
That's not like, it doesn't taste like you just had hot sauce or something like that. It's just kind of a little bit of spice that's left on your palate, like a mild salsa or something like that. How you end up with that little bit of spiciness, but it's not intense.
And the warmer that the bomb gets, the more I'm noticing, I think, the chocolate and the spice.
Yeah, exactly. And the more that overpowering vanilla sweetness is fading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more spice than I remember having in bomb. I always felt like they said that it had the chili peppers in it, but I feel like I never really got that much chili pepper flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's kind of amped up in this release, or it could be the cigar, it could be because we've had the chili only version and we've kind of changed the way our palate is tasting tonight a little bit. But I feel like I definitely get more of that chili than I normally do in bomb.
I almost like taking a sip of the chili and then following up with the regular bomb, because it sort of amplifies that spice a little bit.
All right, so now I'm gonna do the science experiment now, and I'm going to put. I've got a little bit of chili left. I'm gonna put just a little vanilla in there, and then a decent hit of